Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all here with us today. It's me, Jose, and on our weekly walk, we're going to discuss one of the most popular and famous activities here in the park. We're going to discuss, of course, theater on our weekly walk for today. All right, so let's actually go ahead and get right to it. Now, as you folks all know, all participants are muted, but you can use the chat feature to say hello and comment. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A. And our new guide, Desiree, is going to be joining us on the back end, answering any questions and inquiries. So make sure you welcome her aboard today at the Conservancy. All right. Of course, closed captioning has also been enabled. You can, of course, simply turn them off by pressing the live transcript button down at the bottom of the screen and pressing hide subtitles. Now, most of the images that you folks are going to be looking at today, these were taken by myself or they were taken from our official Central Park Conservancy archives. But you're also going to see a few other images from other sources as well, including the New York Public Library. And of course, as you know, our official mission here at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Okay, so now theater, of course, is something that really has been a big integral part of the Central Park landscape, really since the very beginning. In fact, there are at least two major venues here in the park that are dedicated to the art of theater. Now, here in this image, which was, of course, taken from right atop Belvedere Castle, we can actually see one of them right now. This, of course, is going to be the Delcor Theater, which is going to be our first stop for today. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and check out the map right here. Now, today we're going to start off inside the park over at 72nd Street, or rather 81st Street and West Drive. And after looking at the Delcor Theater, then we'll make our way just south to the garden that's, of course, heavily inspired by the words of the English language's greatest playwright, William Shakespeare. And just off towards the west, you can find what's called the Swedish Cottage. Today, the Swedish Cottage is a marionette theater that's pretty popular with local children. Now, beginning our journey over at West Drive, and of course, right off the bat, first thing we see is this lovely little sign that was put up by the Public Theater for this year's free Shakespeare in the Park plays, which I think is a nice little welcome to the theater landscape here in the park that we're going to check out on our walk. All right, so let's go ahead and continue up the pathway. And up ahead, we come to this very large structure known as the Delcor Theater. Now, this is the view that we're, as we're approaching it from the northwest, and you can see pretty much at the large scaffolding for the stage lighting right behind it. Now, I think it's a building that is, of course, really quite easy to overlook, especially if you're just walking around and admiring the trees and flowers planted throughout the area. But for many decades, it's actually hosted some of the top Shakespeare in the Park performances in the country, with some of the most prominent actors having performed here at one point or another. This, of course, is run by what's called the Public Theater, which is this nonprofit group that's based downtown in Lafayette Street and puts on shows there as well. The Delcor Theater really has been around since 1962, and it's a pretty large venue for a park. You can see almost 2,000 people. Now, this was essentially the culmination of many years of hard work and effort by the theater director, Joseph Papp, who really wanted to bring a free Shakespeare performances to the public right here in the park, which of course is a location that's quite easily accessible to many communities for us here in New York City. Now, the whole story of Delcor Theater's establishment is, I think, a pretty fascinating one. And it would basically see Joe Papp square off against Park Commissioner Robert Moses, who was, of course, one of the most powerful officials in the city at that point in time. Basically, Robert Moses wanted the Public Theater to charge admission to kind of recuperate some of the Parks Department's losses. But Joe Papp actually refused, and a whole legal battle ensued for a few years. Today, because of that particular incident, tickets to Shakespeare in the Park are now actually free. But good luck trying to acquire one, since, of course, they're notoriously difficult to acquire. All right. Now, I did mention how the Delcor Theater really has hosted some of the best and most influential Shakespeare in the Park, plays in the country. And of course, some of the top names in theater, film, and television have acted here. So for example, as you folks can see here in the image, we have both Julianne Marie and a young James Earl Jones on the set of Othello in 1964. Other big notable names that have acted in the theater include Meryl Streep, Kevin Kline, and George C. Scott. So we're talking about some really, really big names here in the park, which I think is kind of fantastic. Alrighty, and here, of course, is the view from the inside of the theater, which of course was taken from the top of nearby Belvedere Castle. Through July, the Public Theater this year is going to be hosting performances of Richard III, which is to be directed by the Tony Award nominee Robert O'Hara. Later on in August, tickets for Shayna Taub's adaptation of As You Like It will be released. So this sleepy little theater that we're looking at right now, it's going to be pretty busy for the rest of the summer. Of course, here you can see the ticket windows and ticket booths and doorways that folks are going to be using to enter the theater throughout the summer. Now, here, of course, in New York City, it really is something of a local tradition to see a Shakespeare in the Park play. But as I mentioned earlier before, getting tickets can be a little bit tricky, as many of us have actually experienced firsthand. So if you really want to see some Shakespeare here in Central Park, one of the most common ways is, of course, by lining up at the free ticket line and waiting until noon on the day of the performance when they're distributed. Usually folks start lining up around 6 o'clock in the morning when the park officially opens. So best of luck to any of you that are looking to acquire some tickets this year. All right, and of course, just outside of the theater itself, you can see a set of bronze statues greeting park patrons and folks looking to get tickets. Of course, these statues feature characters from some of Shakespeare's plays. So in this case, we are looking at Prospero and Miranda from The Tempest. And just a few steps away from the Tempest statue, we can see, of course, Romeo and Juliet in a sort of eternal embrace. Now, both of these statues, they were going to be crafted by the artist Milton Hebald in the 1970s, and funding for this was provided for by George Delcor, who was one of our premier, park donors throughout the 20th century. That, of course, is a name that many of you Central Park fanatics may have heard before, since he also funded the Delcourt clock over at the zoo, as well as the Alice in Wonderland statue, officially called the Margarita Delcourt Memorial. And of course, as everyone can see with the large sign just right outside of the theater, he did also provide the funding, obviously, for the construction of the structure itself. Now, prior to it being built as the theater's permanent home, the Public Theater actually staged Shakespeare in the Park plays in various parks around town. So places like Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Staten Island, and then eventually by 1962, Joseph Papp and the Public Theater would get the theater that they really wanted to acquire. All righty, and we are moving along. And as we do so, we're going to walk past the stone building over on the left-hand side that nowadays houses the public restrooms in the area. Now, on our next few stops, we're going to explore the rocky slope just south of Delacorte Theater. Now, this area is, of course, jam-packed with theater-related attractions. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at Shakespeare Garden first, appropriately located just steps away from the main stage where his plays are held today in the 21st century. Now, this garden is, of course, pretty neat since it contains plantings of flowers that are referenced in many of Shakespeare's works. And if you look around amongst the flower beds, you're going to find these nice little plaques with snippets from the Bard's plays. Now, the Shakespeare Garden is, of course, a landscape that many of us are actually quite used to. In fact, we've done many weekly walks here before. But today, I actually want to really kind of focus on the theatrical elements of the garden. So roses, of course, have been used as symbols for love and passion for centuries. So it really is no surprise that they're some of the most common flowers that you'll encounter when reading Shakespeare or really just walking around any park. So June, of course, is actually one of the best months to check out your local rose garden, since they're going to be at peak bloom right around this time of the year, or rather a little bit past in some cases. Alliums, of course, are another plant that can also be seen blooming in early summer this time of the year. And of course, here they are in the garden with their really interesting rounded floral shape. Alliums are basically another word for onions. And in Shakespeare's works, onions are usually used in reference to tears and crying and sad emotions and things like that. So in Antony and Cleopatra, for example, one of the characters reflects on the nature of grief by saying that, quote, "the tears live in an onion that should water this sorrow." And just down the slope, we can see these nice pansies. Now, in a famous scene from Hamlet, Ophelia, of course, she references these flowers when she says, "There's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Pray you, love, remember. And there is pansies, that's for thoughts." Of course, one of the more famous lines, and definitely from the more famous of Shakespeare's works. Now, this area definitely is a nice little spot to take in, of course, all these seasons. It's a great spot to just reflect and to just kind of enjoy nature. And of course, reflect on Shakespeare's words, and of course, really seeing these plants up close. There really is something very therapeutic about walking around Shakespeare Garden. But of course, you can also just kind of rest right here on one of the rustic wooden benches if you get tired. So kind of cozy up with a nice book or a cup of coffee or something like that. Now, there are a couple of these rustic wooden benches here in the garden. It really is nice to be surrounded by so many fragrances and flowers and colors, and of course, just so much literary works all around you by, of course, Shakespeare. Alrighty, and moving on, and we come down these steps that are crafted out of black locust wood, taken from right here in the park itself. And just ahead, we come to the building that's now known as the Swedish Cottage. Now, in case you folks are wondering, yes, this building is in fact actually from Sweden. It was basically crafted or basically constructed back in 1876 using native Swedish pine and cedar wood. And it was then sent to Philadelphia as that country's exhibit for the Centennial Exposition of 1876. The structure was actually meant to be a reproduction of a traditional log cabin, schoolhouse that was, of course, fairly common throughout the Swedish countryside. And here it is when it was located in Philly. Very interesting fact about log cabins and whatnot is that Philadelphia actually was at one point called New Sweden. So yes, throughout the mid 1600s, you might have actually seen these log cabins and whatnot of the same variety from here in the park, which I think is kind of interesting. Now, apparently, when Frederick Law Olmsted came and visited at the Philadelphia Exposition that year, he actually liked these exhibits so much that he arranged for it to be bought and reassembled in Central Park, where, of course, it remains to this very day. These days, of course, the cottage is now more famous as the home of the Marionette Theater that's organized by the Parks Department. They, of course, produce these nice family-friendly shows with these very beautifully made marionette dolls. Now, this particular production that we're looking at, this is actually from just a few years ago. And this is basically the City Parks Foundation's rendition of Puss in Boots. Prior to the Swedish Cottage becoming the Marionette Theater's permanent home back in 1947, the theater itself would actually hold shows throughout various areas in the park. So this photograph, this is actually from the Library of Congress. This is from the 1930s. And as you folks can see, this one takes place at the southern end of the park near Heckscher Playground. So you can actually, of course, see the tall, massive buildings of Midtown. You can see the Essex House right off in the background. Of course, bringing it to Central Park. All right, everybody, so before we continue, let's go ahead and conduct our poll of the day. So on our poll, I want to ask, since we are, of course, on the topic of theater, have you ever seen a play or other theatrical performance in Central Park before? Of course, it can be any kind of play or musical. It can be really any venue as well. So Delcor Theater, Swedish Cottage, perhaps maybe even a Naumburg band shell, really any impromptu stage or in the mall or something like that, or really anywhere in the park is going to be acceptable. All right, looks like enough of us have voted. So let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results with you all right now. All right, so actually it looks like something like about 37% of you have not yet seen a theater or a show or something like that here in Central Park. About 36%, say maybe once or twice before. And the real theater fans here in the park number at about 27%. So either way, whether or not you've been doing or participating in Shakespeare in the Park for years, for decades, or if this is going to be your first summer doing it, of course, we welcome everybody to all these weekly walks. All right, so let's go ahead now and continue on with our walk. And today, to really kind of experience this theme of theater inside of Central Park, we're going to do some of a long walking route. But we start off, of course, from the Delcor Theater. And today we're actually going to end things off over at the mall. So right now, why don't we go ahead and make our way right up these steps and walk right past Belvedere Castle. And of course, from here, we're going to enter the Ramble. The Ramble is, of course, one of the woodlands of Central Park. And while I think it really is super interesting as a landscape, of course, it was basically designed as this wild garden. For today, we're actually just going to walk right through the Ramble to get towards our next stop. But of course, I promise you folks, we will do a weekly walk on the Ramble at some point, maybe next time, maybe in a few weeks or something like that. All right, so after walking through the Ramble for a good while, now, of course, we are here at Bow Bridge. After passing the Ramble and, of course, Bow Bridge, we're going to make our way into what's called Bethesda Fountain, which is basically right over at the heart of Central Park. And from here, we're going to quickly make our way right down the mall. All right, so let's start off with this very prominent landmark right here. This, of course, is the centerpiece of Central Park when it was created back in the 1870s. This one is called the Angel of the Waters. And of course, it depicts an angel essentially blessing the fountain below her. The statue itself was going to be crafted in the early 1870s by the artist Emma Stebbins, who modeled the statue's face after her lover, Charlotte Cushman, who was then known as one of the great stage actresses of her day. Now, Cushman was famous throughout Europe and North America for her very powerful singing voice and dramatic readings of Shakespearean plays like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet. In fact, President Lincoln was actually said to be a big fan of her, and he'd been seen, or he'd actually seen her perform in Washington, D.C. During his presidency. Now, here's both Cushman and Stebbins photographed together. Cushman is seated on the left-hand side, and the artist, Emma Stebbins, is standing right here on the right. When she died not long after the statue's unveiling, Emma Stebbins, who was so distraught at losing her partner, then dedicated her last remaining final years to writing a biography of Charlotte Cushman's life. Now, if you folks are interested in hearing more about the lives of these two women, you can also check out our upcoming Pride in Central Park tour, where we'll examine the lives of LGBT folks that have influenced Central Park over the years. Now, we'll share the link in the chat right now and also at the end of the program. So definitely check that out. It's going to be one of our new programs for the year. All right, and we are quickly moving along. Now that we've arrived here at the mall, let's go ahead and explore what's in store for us here today. Over on our left-hand side, we can see what's called Naumburg Bandshell, which today is going to be the site of concerts and various musical performances. In fact, this month, this area is going to have quite a bit of music happening, since right behind it you have what's called Rumsey Playfield. Rumsey Playfield is the place where Summer Stage at Central Park happens. Of course, I will also do other concerts as well, including the Philharmonic concerts here in the park. Now, we've done plenty of walks around here before, and of course, Ryan just a few weeks ago actually showed us how music really has been a major part of this area on his weekly walk. Now, while it is a venue that's often more associated with music, theatrical performances sometimes do take place here as well. So in this particular image from just a few years ago, for example, you can see the chairs and the stage being set up for a very small production of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. Okay, and as we head down the long, straight pathway of the mall, we can now start to see all the crowds gathered to admire the sights and sounds of Central Park. Now, this area's got many charming statues that were, of course, put up back in the 19th century. And some of these figures have even have actual direct connections to theater itself. So this one here, for example, depicts the writer and poet Fitz Greene Halleck. While today is no longer very much a household name, Halleck did actually write some of the 19th century's favorite topics and activities like theater, basically endearing him to many Victorian audiences. In fact, in one poem called Address at the Opening of a New Theater, Fitz Greene Halleck wrote of the friends of the stage who hail it as the shrine, where music, painting, poetry entwine. Their kindred garlands, whence their blended power, refines, exalts, ennobles, hour by hour. So it's no wonder then that he really was this beloved poet. In fact, he wrote about the everyday life in Victorian times that many folks could absolutely relate to, including, of course, theater. Alrighty, and lastly, on our final stop of the day, we now come to the statue of William Shakespeare. Of course, on our walk, we start off by exploring the Delcor Theater, where his works are performed in the park today in modern times. And then, of course, we also explored nearby Shakespeare Garden. So it's only fitting that we end things off right here at his statue here at the mall. All right, everybody. And I thank you all so much for joining us on this week's weekly walk. Now, we also have, of course, some new programs, as I mentioned earlier on, that I think folks would be interested in. So this month, as we're celebrating Pride Month, do join us for our Pride in Central Park tour. We have virtual tours going on the 23rd and the 30th. We also have a few spots available on our guided tours on Friday, the 24th. We have 2 spots available on the 25th on Saturday, and 1 more for Thursday, June 30th at 6 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you all there. All right, and remember, be sure to also check us out on all of our social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can follow us at Central Park NYC. Now, of course, we'll leave the room open for any last final questions. But from all of us here at the Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.